straightforward to have a conversation with a CFO. You may be already a C-level or senior CS executive who has an access and the door is already open. But maybe just to share a little bit in case you are not, maybe you're in earlier stages in your career and maybe the door is not yet open. So I would recommend, based on my experience, maybe to follow three main practices. And first and foremost, is to be able to be proficient in what I think it's called in an industry the revenue language. So will actually be able to speak the same language as your CFO and finance team. So terms like ROI or cost of acquisition, P&L, lifetime value. From my perspective, they are mandatory for CS professional and CS leader to master. And the second practice is to engage finance, not because they are asking you questions, but because you want to do it proactively. I would say 10 years ago, in a different place, in a different time, I insisted on reading P&Ls and understanding, for example, what cost structure looks like, overheads, and how cost planning is actually done. And that was, from my perspective, invaluable experience. And I learned to communicate with finance teams using their own procedures and terminology. And it was may not be a direct communication at that time with CFO, but it was a very important cornerstone in my career. And later I felt much more confident engaging with CFOs. And generally, I would recommend to be prepared and diligent. It's true for any professional interaction, but with finance, I think this is your ticket. This is where you gain credibility, and this will help you to sustain proper communication and dialogue with CFOs and finance teams and finance leaders. And I believe if you follow all those practices, they will help you to open the door with the CFO and then keep it open as well.
Bhumika, Brett, anything to add there just in terms of how you found yourself in those conversations? What recommendations you would have for CS outside of just learning how to speak the language, like what Guy said?
Sure, I'm happy to chime in. I think one thing that's really important is understanding based on the type of company you work for, your stage as a company, what are the financial goals that are motivating the company kind of to take their next step? Right? And it's very different. If you're an early stage startup, it's going to be very different than if you're a more mature startup that might be looking at an IPO as a next step, right? Or if you're a private equity backed company that has a lot of pressure to meet specific financial goals, both on the growth side and on the profitability or margin side, or if you're a public company, right, and you have the spotlight every quarter on a very public way. And so, based on that, if you can really start to understand what is my CFO likely to care about most, right? Is it, I know, are we in a growth stage with our phase with our company where we absolutely need to grow, right? So if I'm a late stage startup and growth is the primary driver, we know, margin is important, but really growth is what's going to accelerate things, then what are the enablers of that growth and what are that overlaps with customer success? Because if you can really understand what is the direct line between retention and the company's growth overall, and not only the kind of absolute growth of the company, but what impact does that overall growth rate have on the market cap and valuation of the company if we go to raise our next round or we're to go public? So, as an example, if you're making an investment in customer success that you believe will have a positive impact on retention, and you're willing to could build a business case to really justify that in a credible way, if you can link that story of, look, if we can improve our gross retention by 5 points, that's 5 points in new customer acquisition. We don't have to go drive to fill the hole. It's going directly towards growth versus filling the hole that's lost with churn. And then any of that growth is happening on new customer acquisition is going directly towards that top line growth, and it's improving our compound annual growth rate, and it's also improving our multiple because growing at a higher rate is going to command a higher multiple. So the whole idea is that if you can really anticipate or try to get an understanding for when that CFO is sitting in the board meeting, what are they getting beat up about, right? Is it gross retention? Is it net retention? Or is it something that's kind of further up the chain in terms of just growth rate overall. And if you can link your initiatives and your priorities and customer success to those higher order um, points that they are stressed about or thinking about and make that connection for them, then they'll be much more open to a conversation. Because if they see you as a solution and not somebody asking for something, then they're going to be very engaged in that conversation.
Where do you suggest people understand what those metrics are? If a IC CSM just isn't in those board meetings, how would you go about understanding what those numbers might be or what those priorities would be? Any recommendations there?
Yeah, so there's several ways you can glean those. So if you're in a larger public company, then there will be, listening to the earnings reports and really understanding how the executive team talks about the financials in the business is a really good way. Another one is often in smaller organizations, there will be summary updates from board meetings that might hit things at a higher level, but there still will be indications of what those company priorities are. You can also look at OKRs, right? So what are the objectives that are being prioritized and which of those tie to which financial metrics? So even how your own compensation works is typically an indicator of the things that are important for the company overall. And I'd also just recommend you to be bold. Like ask executives what do they care most about and why, because you want to prioritize your team within customer success to align with the things that are most important for the company. And if you ask, you'll likely get the answer, right? Even if it's not, a super low level of detail, you'll get enough to work with that you can start to build the right story.
Thank you. Bhumika, you've been both sides at the finance side, the CS side. Is there any kinds of parts of those conversations, whether it be, I don't know, Guy talked about quite a bit of metrics like the P&L, the retention rate. Are there ones there that you feel like resonate more for someone who is looking at everything holistically from a financial standpoint that maybe CS doesn't focus on? Or like which metrics do you think would be the most important in this case?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm also a little cognizant of using very hardcore finance language. So, depending on where you are in the org, you might look at it differently. So, a CS leader obviously should understand the financial statements, what their impact is on the bottom line of the financial statements, because you are a revenue driver. Revenue recognition is a big part of it. Different orgs recognize revenue differently. So, that's something to keep in mind as a leader. For example, so the consulting work that I do, usage-based companies recognize revenue differently from subscription-based companies. So even that nuance can make a big difference to your P&L, and then your at the end of the day, your all your financial statements, right? But mostly a P&L. So understanding how that translates into the financial statements is very, very important as a CS leader. Going a couple of levels down. So maybe your CS director and then manager and then all the way down to CS. You get more into just the metrics and the measure of those metrics. So net dollar retention, NRR, GRR, understanding the differences between those. Sometimes even NPS, if you don't have anything else. I was giving this, I think this is an example we are talking about. One of the companies that I was consulting for, the only metric that they would give finance is NPS. And as CS, we probably understand how NPS works, right? We understand what those numbers mean, but giving them raw data and just saying this is NPS for finance, they don't know how to translate that into a P&L, right? They don't know what that means. They don't know if that means that you need a budget, do you need more investment? So really breaking it down, having that executive sort of summary for your CFO is really, really important. So the translation piece, as well as just understanding how you are measured in CS if you're further down in that chain.
What about for organizations where maybe there isn't the idea that CS is a revenue driver? I feel like I see that a lot. CS is a revenue driver, CS is a revenue driver, but I feel like the truth for so many people is that CS has a support like side capacity that doesn't necessarily highlight that or bring that into light, what are recommendations, and this question could be for anyone, to really have that buy-in when you don't kind of start already?
I can start maybe with
Mhm.
maybe to continue what Bhumika said to the translation part. So obviously CS are very focused traditionally on onboarding, adoption, value, but all of that can, may resonate or not with CFOs, with finance. I mean, what does it mean? So if you are, for example, can prove to finance that faster onboarding and investing quick onboarding or improved onboarding, efficient onboarding and adoption, and there is a correlation. And yes, it could be that you're in a small company, so maybe that's not easy to prove. But when you grow, there you have more statistics, and you can prove that certain investment that you make um, have strong correlation and positive correlation with retention. And retention is keeping your revenue. And finance understand what keeping revenue means, or revenue leakage. The same goes for expansion. So you can prove that you are doing certain things that are helping the chances or the probability to increase expansion. In a more mature organization, I'm trying to, although recommend to actually mark or tag those CS qualified opportunities and qualified leads, and that creates a lot of attention with sales. Sometimes even conflicts, but that's a separate discussion. And with finance, and finance likes to see that your win rate in customer success quad, if you're able to track it, and there's no reason why it shouldn't be the case in any CRM, that those have better win rates. Those are usually with a faster time to close. And again, those are metrics that very easy to prove and talk to finance about, and they are just a byproduct of what CS does. So you just do your good job and just make sure that it's visible and it's correlated with the business outcomes.
Thanks. Mm, you said something, and I'm going to be difficult, but you said that the
Come on.
CS sales conversation might be a separate conversation. I'd like to make it a today conversation. So when you're sharing budget, when CFOs kind of look at the sales org holistically, go to market overall, sales and success overall. And Brent, maybe you've seen things that like win a CS budget over a sales budget. What have you seen? What recommendations do you have for people who are um, not necessarily like at odds, but sharing budget almost with a different team with different goals, different priorities?
Yeah, I'm happy to dive in here because we see this a lot because Reef is a revenue generation engine, both for retention, right? So being able to improve retention rates, reduce churn, but also for growth, right? Growth of existing customer revenue. And sometimes that lives within one organization, one budget. We might have a CCO that has responsibility for both retention and growth, but it's very often that those responsibilities are split. And I think it's one of the challenges of net retention excellence is that there isn't a single kind of owner or point of responsibility within an organization at an executive level to really live and die on the performance of this one number. So it does become more challenging when that gets distributed. You might have a sales leader that owns the growth side. You might have a CS leader that owns or customer leader that owns the retention side. And in those situations, it's really important to make sure that there's tight alignment between those organizations, right? Whether it's, even if it's not, hey, we're going to 50-50 split the budget and have a shared budget, even if it's the CS that's funding this or making the case to fund this, making sure that you have that sales executive fully bought into what you're doing, why you're doing, the downstream benefits for them is really important as a first step. The second step is being really credible about how you're going to prove that the value is what you project the value to be. All right, it's I think where you lose credibility with the CFO is if you say, I have this solution, it's going to deliver great ROI, and you kind of wave your hands and show something kind of very lightweight in terms of, it can go and, it's going to do great things in the organization. Our customers are going to be stickier and, we're going to get a higher retention rate. And we estimate it's going to be 5 points, right? And there's just not a lot of not a lot of science or accountability behind, well, how will I know that's true? Will you be able to prove it? How long will it take to prove it? And then what happens if it doesn't do what you say it does, or you can't prove what you say it does, right? So I think that the foundation is really aligning both on the retention side and the growth side to say, one, how do we plug this in a way that um, we know that it's working, or we know we're getting what we expect. And this could be a technology purchase. It could be headcount as well. It could be, look, I think what the CFO is looking for is predictable inputs and predictable outputs, right? So if I were to add a head, what is the yield that I can expect on that head? Tied to some hard number. If we think, okay, I think adding a head will improve our coverage, and that's worth, 1.5 percentage points in gross retention improvement. And you have the data to calculate what that means in terms of actual dollars and what that means, and then you can compare the value of that retention improvement to the cost of the headcount and extrapolate that. But I think what you have to be willing to do as you try to justify these investments is, one, show that any investment is going to be a kind of low risk, high reward scenario, ideally, right? So we're going to, in the beginning, make this leap of faith or investment, but we think that it has the potential to yield 10x, 20x what we invest. And we have a clear way to track how that's going and whether it's happening. And then you have to be willing to live with the outcome of that, right? And so you can't just get the dollars, make the investment, and then never kind of address the conversation again, because it'll be much difficult the next time you ask for something. But if you actually track and hold yourself accountable to say, okay, I'm going to measure how well this investment works and what it delivers to the organization, and then you can go back to that CFO or your partner and make that case. You're building credibility, and you showed like, okay, I made this investment. Here's what it returned, and then you're in a place when you ask for that next investment that you're going to have a high level of trust and some belief that, okay, this person is smart with the way they allocate their budget, and their budget usually leads to positive results. So we're going to allow them to make more bets and trust them to do more. So I do think there's this process of, as you make investments, even with your current budget, the more that you can quantify the impact that it's making, and then intentionally provide those results back to e-staff, back to finance, so they can see how well your investments are paying off, then you just build that trust so that when you really need something that might be a harder ask, you're in a really good position to be able to justify that.
I want to ask, based on that, for kind of this continuous reiteration, improving and looking at, the numbers and showing the value, what have we all seen the expectations be, or what have you seen work on terms of timing? So thinking about how, if you implement something for an SDR team, it's almost immediate, right? Like those calls are booked that week, you're good to go. You can kind of really talk about that and see the deliverability there. In CS, we all know it's a little bit more of a lagging indicator, right? Like the renewals are later. The driving factors do happen a little bit longer out. What is a realistic expectation you should be setting for when the conversation of like, hey, here was the ROI? And how frequently would you suggest looking at that, just given that CS does operate a little bit differently? And Guy, Bhumika, I don't know if you've seen kind of different things across different customers that you work with, just in terms of the kind of consulting that you've done. I don't know if it would be like based on the industry or the type of P&L. Any insight on that?
Yeah, I can jump in. So it you're absolutely right. It does depend a little bit on how the renewals are measured. So is it a monthly renewal? Is it an annual renewal? Do they have cutoff dates for the renewals? So the renewal is a big one. But I would say that quarterly is generally a good measure for anything to show success. And I think that being realistic about your predictions is also important, right? So if a CS leader is implementing, let's say it's a CS tool, you know that there is that ramp up time for the tool. You need to make sure that the tool is implemented, it's usable, it's adopted, and then it will bring some results, right? the other part that I would say is that you're also partnering closely with sales. So um, using the correct measures is also necessary. So saying that the cost of acquisition is actually lower for a customer, right? So saying that, for example, you have logo retention as part of your measure. That's actually a really good one because that one's almost immediate, right? So if you have a logo and they're renewing and you know that's perfect. Like you're like, yeah, I know that this logo is renewing versus acquiring a new logo, which takes time. So I think that measuring this based on the partnership with sales is important. And of course, the renewals matter. But then also being aware of what that actually means for your organization and how that translates into a metric that you can actually use. But again, I would say quarterly is probably the best way to go just so that you can kind of meet the same um, timing as sales because sales does quarterly as well.
I would
Totally.
agree on the quarterly, especially when it aligns very well with the sales reporting and updates. And generally, I think CS, when they are aligned in with sales, that gives a lot more credibility as well on finance and CFO discussions. Much better than pointing the finger to each other about different things. That's not helping. Maybe one more thing, because you mentioned, Vinova, that sometimes it takes time for us to show the value, and obviously it could be part of a plan, but I think one thing that sometimes gets a little bit hidden, and I'm trying to advocate for it, is the ability of CS to support revenue forecasting, uh,
Mhm.
because because logo retention and expansion, this is bread and butter for CS. So, and that's part of what sales overall targets are. So should they do their own planning and forecasting on their own? No, they should be doing it with CS, and being able to impact or improve the predictability. And Brent mentioned before, CFOs, they like predictability. So if you can influence that in an earlier stage and prove it along the way, that's a major, let's say, card to use in your in establishing credibility with the CFO, with say, with finance as well.
Yeah, I'd love to second that. We just did a pilot with a customer that has a team of 40 renewal managers that are manually, they have 14,000 customers, and they forecast everyone by looking at, product signal and then making a call on the forecast. So the challenge for us was, hey, can we use machine learning based predictive scoring to do as well or better as the people, because there's a ton of capacity we could free up. And so you're right, if you're doing a use case that says, we think we can improve retention by getting visibility. We see this all the time, right? Getting visibility 9 months before renewal when there's risk, and then actioning that early. Well, it takes a little while for that to actually prove out, right? Because you have to send the risk alert 9 months in advance. You have to see if there's action taken, and then you have to wait for the renewal to happen before you actually see the proof, right? So you have to look for these leading indicators, and you have to look for lagging indicators. So for us, it's really being able to prove without a doubt that we can objectively drive accurate predictions. And then there's a little bit of a leap of faith that you can then generate revenue from those predictions, but a lot of the risk is taken off the table. So with forecasting, all what we had to do was show that, okay, we're going to get a data set. They're going to hold back a lot of data. We're going to say we're going to only give you data until 9 months ago, and we're going to force you to make a guess in terms of what happens in predicting a forecast. And then we're going to go measure, were you right? Were you wrong? How well did you do versus the people that were making forecasts? And is this something that is actually going to save us a lot of money? So they held a very high bar, but going through this, but it was something that, again, getting this initial approval from finance to say, like, we're not doing this for free. We're paying a little bit for this process, but we're going to know without a doubt whether this thing is going to be accretive. And we had to, meet a high bar, but at the end of the day, we actually proved that we could do better than the people were doing forecasting, check the box, and then our sponsors then they had a much bigger vision than just forecasting. They want to use this to drive um, a customer profiling predictive data for their digital strategy. They wanted to do it for early warning system for retention. They wanted to use it for upsell prediction, right? But they didn't try to make that case in the beginning. They really anchored it on this proof point that says, okay, we can get 7-figure ROI just on this forecasting use case. And now they're going back and making the case to say, look, okay, we've proven that this thing is going to more than pay for itself. So here's what we really want to buy in the package. So I think that you have to, when you're going into these initial engagements, whether it's scoping something that you have a big vision for, but maybe you're going to start with a smaller footprint to really gather some data on how it works. The more that you can be credible and really tie it to quantifiable metrics, the better. I know today, productivity is a big one in the world of generative AI, and productivity, frankly, is something that's a little tricky to quantify because it's one to say, hey, we're saving time and doing more with our reps, but I think you have to also tie that to what does that mean in terms of the company's financial performance? Does that mean that you're willing to hire less as you scale because you can cover more? Does that mean you're willing to reduce the size of your team and to actually deliver that benefit, right? So I think, really understanding what is the value you're trying to deliver back to the organization up front, and then building use cases around that to prove that it works is a first step towards kind of taking a larger bite of the apple if you want to have a more ambitious vision.
The idea of anchoring on something important and being able to kind of truly hone in on one number, like you were saying, this team didn't, do everything all at once in the beginning. Is there one metric that you would say, if you went in blind to an organization today, that a CFO would care about? Like if you were having that conversation, what would be that one metric? Is it NDR? Is it GDR? Is it capacity planning? Is it productivity? What would you deem the most important from your experience today for all of you?
I would say protect the revenue first. Basically, that's where CS is. That's the main your main mission. Of course, we want to grow, but you will not grow if you lose customers. So I would say any metric that ties to revenue protection. For me, there are more, but I would say instinctively that will be my first metric.
And Bhumika, do we agree? Like,
Yeah,
ARR protect the revenue, that is first and foremost.
absolutely. It depends on what you can say NDR or NRR, either way. But yeah, I'm with Guy on that. Especially today where with the economy, everybody's sort of like protecting their revenue and trying to increase that loyalty factor as well with their customers for subscription. I'm talking purely SaaS companies right now. But yeah, absolutely protect your revenue, and protect your logos and loyalty from your customers.
Yeah, I think there is an opportunity for CS leaders. I think if you want to increase your influence in your organization, even if you don't necessarily own the upsell, but you're contributing CSQLs or you have an ability to influence growth of existing customers, in most organizations, there's not an executive leader that really owns net retention and tracks it and is really the internal expert on how we're performing, what we can do to improve. And so, because sales is focused on new customer acquisition as their primary charter, right? And they might care about growth, but just as much as it contributes to their ability to generate new revenue. So if you can, even if you just maybe you have responsibility for renewals and you have a light impact or some impact on growth, if you really become the shepherd of that metric in your organization and you read out to your leadership or e-staff on net retention performance, it's a really credible way for you to provide something that's really valuable for your organization, that's a direct extension of what you do already, that's important for the organization, and a way to really expand your influence. So that's something that if you're not already kind of claiming kind of ownership for, hey, I'm going to be the kind of internal executive expert on net retention, I think it's a really good opportunity.
We've talked a lot about what you should be doing. What What you do. Let's say you've got that conversation, you're going in, GR, retention, all of that's important. You're totally looking to have that executive ownership. What has failed here? What do CS teams get wrong in these conversations? What takes away credibility? What have you seen kind of go the opposite way that you would advise against?
From a, let's say, a approach perspective, I would say meeting your CFO or your finance team when you need something rather than in a position where you're leading a value, let's say, value-based discussion where you are actually showing value and what your contribution is rather than, okay, I need something. And, I think I said it before, this is a classic CS motion. So we want to meet our customers not when they have a problem with us, but when we are controlling the narrative. And I think with finance, it's no different. You probably want to be able to control the engagement and not to be first meeting someone when you need an approval for investment. That will be one thing. The other thing that I know used to be a practice a few years ago, but we know that it doesn't work well with finance is to talk about CS metrics generally that do not have a contribution or do not relate to a specific business outcome. So I can report about how many QBRs or EBRs we did, meetings with customers, adoption rates, but if that is not related to outcome-based metrics, I feel you will be losing, not say credibility, but you're losing attention from the finance stakeholders that you would like to work with, and you need their attention.
Mika, Brent, any horror stories? Any wisdom to impart on this one?
I
I
mean,
think go
oh,
ahead.
sorry, go ahead, Brent.
Just a quick one. I
yeah.
think so. I think one trap is that you may be really stressed out because of a decision that's been made. Maybe it's headcount reductions or other things. Trying to just say generally how bad it's going to be and all the bad things that are going to happen without data behind it, I think is also going to fall on deaf ears. I think it may be the way you feel internally, and you may be projecting your own stress, but I think you have to come in very measured and very kind of data driven, or it's going to be hard to get their attention.
Yeah, I don't have much to add there, but I think understanding how CS affects the bottom line initially, right? So, like Guy said, don't have that conversation just when you need something. In fact, I think one of the first things that you should do if you're a CS leader, new CS leader at a company is sit down with the CFO or the head of finance and just ask them, how is revenue being recognized? And how is CS contributing to this? And sometimes they might not have the answer for how CS is contributing to it. So that is again an opportunity for you to make that translation. But yeah, work closely with them before you have to meet with them to actually present your case for something. One of the examples I can give is just again, I was going back to how revenue is recognized. So for example, with a usage-based company, adoption matters a lot more than a subscription-based company. So, the revenue is not for a usage-based company, the revenue is actually not recognized until the customer is using the platform. So they don't actually care when a booking is closed, right? They don't care when sales closes a booking because they don't actually recognize the revenue until adoption is happening. Whereas with subscription, they recognize the revenue straight away when a booking is closed. So if you are a CS leader and you don't understand that nuance, and you kind of put adoption on the back burner in your usage-based company, you would definitely want to have that at top of mind, right? So just understanding what's important to actually recognizing the bottom line revenue.
Thank you. We've talked a little bit about who we're collaborating with, clearly finance in this case. Obviously, there is nuances in how we would work with sales. Are there other teams worth having a conversation with, collaborating with, aligning with that you've seen, whether it be product or marketing or other ways that CS teams have collaborated with teams towards these conversations with CFOs?
I can share one example, product team. So in one of my roles, we were looking to implement Pendu. CFO didn't know what Pendu is. I'm not giving any free marketing now for publicity for Pendu, but they're a good tool anyway. And I had to work and collaborate with the product team to kind of say, that's not just this customer success use case. It's also a product and engineering use case, and the decisions that will eventually be decided later on about a product roadmap, about what priorities will be done in terms of product development. They also have a cost impact, and that part was a very strong argument eventually when you are presenting the business case. And we did have to present the business case, but it was presented jointly with a product and customer success together.
Mika, Brent, have you had to collaborate with product or other teams in this? And is it like a joint presentation the way that guy's talking about, or what have y'all seen work?
Yeah, I think CS is very similar to the role of a project manager in that way, where you have all of the responsibility and none of the, the authority, right? So your half of your role is just collaborating with different teams. So we talked about sales, we're talking about finance, product for sure. Also depending on the org, again, the CS org might actually fall under product or marketing, depending on the company. So marketing, product, to an extent, engineering as well, depending on how technical the product is very, very important. And in general, also just to make your case, having somebody else that, another leader that will say, yeah, we definitely need this is, gold. So yeah, just almost every department, especially in the GTM space, like you have to be very close to sales, marketing, and support as well.
Yeah, great answer, Bhumika. My answer is going to be a little bit reef specific just because it's the world we live in every day. But the whole crux of our credibility and our value prop is based on our ability to prove that we can accurately predict churn 9 months in advance, that we can predict which customers are statistically most likely to grow and should be targets for upsell. So actually drafting in data science, internal data science teams, analytics orgs who really understand kind of data science techniques and metrics and can validate that, hey, when Reef ingests your data and builds these predictive scores and shows you how we did back testing to prove that they're predictive, that you have someone that's really signing off and that is validating, like, okay, the approach they took is solid. The way that they evaluated model performance is objective and credible, and what they're saying they can do, they can actually do. Because especially with a technical solution, it's easy to get kind of caught up in the jargon and be convinced that because the vendor kind of says it in a very convincing way, that it must be true. If you have somebody internally who can actually provide those checks and balances to make sure there's accountability, and they're the ones, it's not you trying to convince finance that it's actually working, but it's someone in your organization who really understands this world, who can stand behind that, then I think that it will really help your chances for getting things approved.
I do want to be conscious of time. I know that we want to save a little bit of Q&A. So just to wrap up this part of the conversation, what is the single smartest thing a CS leader could do for the next meeting? So whatever that next meeting is, what is your one recommendation? Maybe we'll just go in the same. Yeah, go for it.
I would just say be curious. Like, don't guess at what they care about. Ask, like, find out what are the things that are, if they prioritize the metrics that they care about, and then specifically the ones that CS can have some influence on, what matters and why, and then you know your starting point in terms of how to present your case in a way that will resonate.
Yeah, I would add to that. Definitely step one would be curious and ask, but the step two would be to get the help that you need to understand those metrics and make that translation. Sometimes we feel a bit siloed in CS, or we feel a bit alone. But definitely get that help. I mean, our CS communities are amazing. If you want external help, if you don't feel like you have the help internally, yeah, so get that support, get that help.
I would add leverage your strengths as customer success. This is again a stakeholder management play. So you need to understand what they need. You need to understand their position. You need to assess what makes them successful. We talked about different examples here, depending on the industry, depending on the size of the company and their stage. All of that will impact finance and the CFO. So if you stick to your stick to your strength and be able to leverage those capabilities. Yes, you will need to do some learning, but you probably be in a position to understand exactly what the CFO needs and how they become successful, the same as you do with your customers as well.
Well, thank you for answering all of my questions. I'm happy to pivot to audience questions. There should be the chat and or the Q&A. Either one truly works. And so I don't think we have any questions quite yet. They did want to save a little bit of time for anybody who'd like to ask kind of at the end here. Is there anything while we give people a second that we didn't touch on that maybe you didn't get the chance to talk about that you found important in kind of your journey that you just wanted to highlight? I know for myself personally, what Bhumika said earlier about kind of being one of the only advocates for CS is challenging. So bringing in those external offers is definitely a takeaway that I'd have. But any kind of last advice you'd have there?
Maybe I would add for collaboration with sales. Brent mentioned it before in a different way, but sometimes if you want to invest from tools perspective, some of those tools, by the way, are and I think the example Brent gave is very strong for sales and CS together. Some of those tools, some of the investments that are made, you better collaborate, especially with sales team to be able to prove the value. And again, joining as one team usually makes it much better. I mean, I can think about, call recordings, AI, even virtual sales room solutions that actually are very well relevant for CS. All of those, some of those tools will make an impact both on sales and CS, and I would strongly recommend to see where those collaborations can get in front, how it can, let's say, improve your position in front of the CFO when you ask for investments.
I love that point that Guy made. I was just going to say, um, you need to do a cost benefit analysis even when you're asking for a tool, right? And I'm not saying that CS leaders don't do this, but I do feel like sometimes it's you think that you just need a tool, because everybody has a tool, and you're like, oh, I'm a CS leader, I should have a tool. Really make that case for it and do that cost benefit analysis. You can't run away from numbers. You really can't. Like you have to do the vendor evaluation. You have to understand if there's current tools that you're using. For example, if you're using a Salesforce or HubSpot, can you continue to use that and actually get what you need from those existing tools, versus implementing a new one? But maybe you can't, and depending on the company size and your requirements, it might be very different. And the other part of it that I would say that is probably a different topic altogether is the data cleanliness aspect of those tools is really important as well. So sometimes it's not the investment, it's about are you actually ready to implement it? And is your data actually ready for that? So again, working internally with your team, maybe not for the buy-in, but actually to get your data to that stage where you actually can implement a tool. That's where engineering would come in as well. So sort of a different track, but then leads to the same outcome, which is, hey, if I want to get buy-in from the CFO or from finance, how can I make my case really, really strong? And one of the ways that you can do that is just make sure that you've done your research, you're in your data and your CS team maturity is in the space that you can actually implement the things that you're asking for.
Yeah, I think the data point is a really good one. And I think data challenges often creates paralysis because it's just overwhelming. It's like, oh, our CRM's very messy, so unless we go fix everything, we can't really do anything, right? So I think it's really important to understand what is actually like, if you think about cleaning certain aspects of your data, what's truly important and what's kind of noise, right? Is it, you know, I would work backwards and start with, okay, what are the critical financial metrics that we need to track related to our customers? And then start to layer in what are the things that we know are going to be consistently captured, and create a clear picture of a customer, whether it's product engagement data or support engagement data or revenue history with customers, kind of what they've purchased, what's in their contracts, right? Getting that stuff cleaned up, you can get a long way with improving your business if you just have the basics cleaned up. And then there's things that may never get cleaned up, in terms of if you're trying to get your team to keep fields up to date, and just relying on people doing it and things staying current, it's a losing battle. So I think if you can really get those base kind of foundational data up to date. And now generative AI is getting much better at just capturing the nuanced interaction data anyway, so you don't need people to enter data as much. I think with just a small investment and focused investment, you can fix your critical data that makes you much more ready for these new investments.
I was going to say shameless pitch for Reef here because you guys are awesome with that.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do try to help organizations, because we plug into the usual suspects in terms of data sources, your CRM, your product telemetry, your support data, marketing data. And then we give you very clear idea of if there are gaps, exactly where they are and what to do, so that you can we can give you a hit list of 10 things to go do, versus kind of swimming in hundreds that you're wondering what's important. So we don't let data be an inhibitor to implementation, but we give you a very focused kind of feedback loop to say, okay, if you fix these, 3 or 4 things, then we'll be able to do a really good predictive model. So thanks for the plug there, Mika.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for hopping on.